Okay, when people look for a sense of order, when people look for guidance in knowing what to do with their lives, if they can't believe in some kind of transcendent order, if they want to avoid a kind of dogmatic appeal, where can they go? To what do they look in order to find guidance? I think traditionally people say, well, we try to assess people's values. And when we go to values, oftentimes we talk about their ethics or their morals, and then somehow laws relate to that. I mean, laws somehow either shape values, or values are the laws are an expression of those values. I mean, there's some sort of dialectic there. What I want to do in this very short video is just offer what I would take to be some points of clarification. I don't think we all have to agree on these. In fact, my guess is that part of the difficulty, from my perspective, is that many people just interchangeably slide around between ethics and morality as if they're the same word, and then they really don't know what to do with legality or how law relates to those concepts. Okay, so the first concept I want to talk about is ethics, or what I would call ethicality. Ethicality is a kind of calibration of hypocrisy in one's values. So when we speak about an ethical question, the question is, to what degree is the person living up to what they take to be their own espoused morals? Morals are always said or sayable. They're cultural beliefs. They're individually owned beliefs, but they're said or sayable, and they're oftentimes reasoned discussions over the good, the right, the just. When people want to haggle and debate over what is good, what is just, what is right, they oftentimes point to consequences. They may give different philosophical systems. All of these are offering morals to people. But I think part of the problem is that even when people know the right thing to do, they may not do it. And they may not do it to different degrees. The degree to which people can be in alignment with particular morals, that's ethicality, whereas the morals themselves, those are the said and sayable values for those people. And see, look at how the consequences fold out once we unpack those as, I guess, sort of complexity. There could be people who have, for example, very racist morals, who have a racial superiority as part of their morals, their value system, and yet there may be someone who's like lazy, and so their ethicality would be low, right? Think of how many people really think that meat eating is bad and yet continue to eat meat. These, my guesses are, I would call people who lack ethicality. A person who cheats in class but knows that they shouldn't, this is a person who fails, I guess, in ethicality. Whereas someone who wants to argue about whether or not certain things are right or wrong, this is a dispute over morals. I think the problem is that many people seem to believe if everyone could agree upon their morals, all our troubles and values would go away. There'd still be ethical failure. There still would be hypocrisy. There'd be contradiction. There would be people who would fail to live up to their own espoused morals. Now, we're at that point where we could probably talk about laws and legality. I think, sort of mythical way to tell the story is that all creatures, all organisms here on the planet, originally they just submitted to like the universal law, like capital L law, and law was just sort of where command and obedience were one. If you look at other creatures, they don't seem to be formulating explicit morals for themselves and then struggling to live up to them. If anything, there's just the command and the obedience are at the same time. Humanity introduces this breach, which we've already talked about, the creation of ethics and morals. But when you move to laws in the modern sense, and LAWS and with small l, and we understand them as regulating ideals done by third-party bureaucracies that help, I guess, protect individual interests and collective interests, has to do with arbitration between disputes. There's all kinds of complex things that come in with laws. I think now here's where there's interesting dynamics here. I think many people fear that moral diversity will lead to an ethical languor. That is, if people understand that there can be diverse moral views of which they're equally valid, then many people fear that there will be an ethical languishing, or people will become less ethical. Whereas they believe, I think some people believe, that the more universalist and really ultimately universalist we can take our morals to be, the more ethically intense we could feel about them. That is, the more we're inclined to say, yes, we really must do it. And I think there is some sense of that. Now, part of the problem is that both of those meanings today have become shadowed over with legality and laws in the small l, meaning many people want to say, hey, if it ain't illegal, there's nothing wrong with it. Hey, what's wrong with it if it's not illegal? Now, a person could say, well, it's immoral. Look at the consequences. You're bringing harms to your family, harms to your friends, harms to your own life, and harms not just to your physical body in terms of suffering, but in terms of your own potential, who you could be, what contributions you could make to your own character, your own development, and to the larger world around you. That is potentially an item of concern. Unfortunately, people say, well, if it's illegal, then it must be bad. If it's illegal, if it's illegal, it must be bad. If it's legal, it must be good. I don't know if people want to say that, but that does seem to be the logic that many people move to. And then it seems like when we, when we apply laws, so oftentimes, sometimes we apply the law because we suspect an ethical failure. Other times, we're trying to help promote a moral, right? See, I mean, I think this dynamic of how ethics, morals, and laws, modern laws relate, it seems to me a very complicated, sort of set of dynamics that move from the individual self-relation, the problem of self-relation, and that we can bodily relate to what we say. And then there's the second relation of what people talk about, of different groups, different cultures, different collectives, the different morals that they have, and how they, in their culture, give those practices, how they feel about vital questions about life and death, about marriage practices, about justice practices, about ownership practices, all of these kinds of things. There's all kinds of morals there. And then the different philosophical systems that people make recourse to in trying to justify those different morals. All of those is a sort of social dynamic, right, that's added on top of this existential problem of the individual. And then there is a third party functional anonymity that is contemporary modern legality. Part of the dynamic there, right, I think, is to realize that there are at least three different things going on, and that sometimes we say that, when people were acting immoral, those were times when we needed cultural change. For example, rebellion against slavery, to some people that was seen as immoral, that they thought that you should just accept being a slave. Now, certainly not everyone. I think there are many people who thought this was an unjust moral, right? Laws, again, very similarly, right? There are some times where we'll have a law and people will protest against the law, and it's not that they're protesting against the law because they simply don't know about that, or from their culture that wouldn't be the case, and so they've been caught, but instead they have a real attempt to try to change the moral. The question that I keep wanting to raise, and I've raised it before and I would raise it again, please, is to what extent can culture help create laws that foster moral diversity but increase ethical intensity? How is that possible? So Bill Clinton was caught, and he said he didn't have sex with that woman. Was he actually experiencing ethical failure and he had shared morals, or was he trying to explain that his morals were different and people just didn't understand? Was it a moral difference or an ethical failure?